A scholar of Indian art that other scholars have been inspired by, a dancer, an art historian, an archivist, a person who's written 18 books or more, and a person who has been a pathbreaker of an arts administrator. Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan's erudition and stature is unparalleled. She's been a Rajya Sabha member. She's been the member of UNESCO's executive board. She has also been a secretary to Government of India in the Ministry of Education. It is a pleasure to have her on Trailblazers. Welcome to the show, Kapila ji. You've witnessed so much in culture over the decades. Today we have several cultural institutions, both private and public. What was it like when you started out?
Priya, that is a easy as also a very difficult question to answer. And I am responding to the last part of your question, when I started out.
Right.
I don't know when I started out. Let me say that I'm using the singular my, but it is not singular. It is really of those decades. I happened to be brought up at a time when there was virtually no such thing as government patronage for the arts. Indeed, the arts were outside the sphere of the state. This was the situation pre-1946. And in fact, I would say even immediately after in another way. However, please remember that when we talk about the arts, just to give an example, the most outstanding example is of the great poet Rabindranath Tagore. After all, he was a poet. He was, of course, a singer. He was then later a painter. And he was the creator of Vishwabharati. It was in Vishwabharati that you had the first genesis of a Kala Bhavan, a Sangeet Bhavan, and not to speak about a language Bhavan. Imagine in Bolpur to have a Hindi Bhavan. Now that is the initiative of an individual living at a certain time. Also at this point, one has to remember, and I'll take only 1 minute to refresh your memory, you know this, that there was the College of Fine Art in Calcutta, and where E.B. Havel was the principal, and where Rabindranath Tagore and Govindendranath were. It was there that a turning took place to give what we today call the Bengal School of Painting. It was there that a turning took place because Gurudev brought a Manipuri person, he was really from Navadvip, and Narendra Kumar's father, and a Kathakali person, to Shantiniketan to create another school of what one today. It was there that his poetry and his music came together in order to be impregnated into an institutional framework. This was the entire yearly thing. And I think that one has to remember then that these were, and there were other efforts. Let's go south. Rukmani Devi is setting up the Kalakshetra, the setting up of the Music Academy in Madras, to mention just this, and I'll not mention Kerala and other places. So there were individuals or a group of individuals who were creating institutions which was also part of nationalism,
Right.
because it was to establish a national identity like that.
Yes.
Now let's shift in a way to Punjab, because what happens in Punjab, and something that people don't remember, and that is Pune was very important, but Pandit Onkar Nath Thakur was in Punjab. And it is from there that a certain type of absolute effervescence of what we today call classical Indian music took place. It was also the third dimension, and one can elaborate on each of these. And talking of Pandit Onkar Nath, you have to relate that to Maharashtra and Pune and the
Yes.
movement of the Gandhar Mahavidyalaya. There was then a situation where individuals had gone together as part of establishing a national identity.
Yes.
And this was so practically in all parts of India. I shift ground to Kashmir, where also I was brought up, because my maternal grandfather was the maker of, and my maternal grandmother was the establisher of many institutions.
Okay, so that's where the genes come from.
Absolutely. And I think that story probably needs to be told, because my mother went to a convent school. And she came back one day and they said that I'm very good and so on, and in Srinagar, but they want me to become a Christian. And my grandmother said nothing. She said, that's all right, please go, and so on. And we had a very strong Arya Samaj, thanks to my grandfather, and all that was going on. But my grandmother just told my grandfather that there'll be no cooking in the house for the next 3 weeks or something like that. You please fend for yourself. Within that period, she found a piece of land and started an institution which is called, with her name, Devaki Kanya Pathshala, open without burqa, and open to all religions, Hindu, Muslims, or whatever else. And the institution is still going on. It had a bad time, it was burnt. We again put it back. Now, this happened in the early part of this century.
Okay.
So it isn't. Also in Srinagar, there was, then he shifted, I forget his name exactly, I think Pandit Jialal, that's right. Pandit Jialal. He was Dogri. He was from Jammu, but he had learnt music. And he started a first small school in Srinagar of music. And that is where I got my first music lessons, in a way.
Okay.
I just want to, so that one is traveling from one part.
Yes.
One was everything in the
You're pretty much establishing the fact that these institutions were created by the drive of individuals,
Yes.
rather than by the state and
by the,
yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
And by civil society.
Right.
You know the correspondence between Gandhiji and Rabindranath Tagore.
Yes.
Gandhiji wrote to Rabindranath Tagore that I don't want you to be going and giving dramas in order to collect and being an actor on the stage. You know this. And Rabindranath said, what's wrong with this?
Yeah, exactly.
So there is a tension here. Now let's get to Delhi. And one can get to other parts of Delhi or Lucknow or this.
Yes.
Where were the institutions? Because the patronage and this is extendable to other parts, and it is extendable to Orissa in another way, in a small or a big way, because the patronage came from the princely states.
Right.
And the father of Amjad, father of Birju, etc., etc., they were all in, and one of the finest patrons of the arts was the Nawab of Rampur.
Yes.
And the Nawab of Rampur really nurtured all this. As we know, the Gwalior Gharana was also patronized, and you know the whole story of the Gharana system. So there was in place a very strong Gharana system here. There was in place a very strong, what we call either a Vani or a Sampradaya system in the south.
Yes.
And by now, of course, Bengali music or Rabindra Sangeet was all over. And in Orissa, since you had the institution of the Maharis, even if it was dwindling,
Yes.
and you have some of those Maharajas, or you had a rural base in the Dakshin Sahi or the other Sahis in Mayurbhanj, also patronized by a small prince, or you had Saraikala, also patronized by the Prince of Saraikala. Yes. So all this was on the ground, and nothing to do with the central state.
Right.
Let's get that out of the way. Now in Delhi, what was the position? The position was that Delhi was a city of either, as they say, the loyalists, the government loyalists, or on the other hand, nationalists. These were the two polarities. And there was no space for music, dance, or something within the educational system.
Right.
Although I moved from Calcutta to Srinagar to Delhi to other places, Delhi, but a school like the Indrapur school started the first music master and a drawing master. We had a music master. This was quite revolutionary, and that girls had to learn this. Then it was the civil society. It decided that there should be an institutional base. And I go and bring you up to the 1939, when the first school of music and dance, it was called a Hindustani School of Music and Dance. It was in Connaught Place near the...
Yes.
And and for that, one has to remember and give due recognition, which has not been given as much as she did, Nirmala Joshi.
Yes.
And Nirmala ji's role there, what did she do? She brought out people from the courts of the Nawab of Rampur. And these great names that you are all too familiar in the field of classical music, Mushtaq Hussain and these people were brought here for short periods, but Hafiz Ali came here for a longer period. And that is Amjad's father.
Yes. Yes.
And so did Achan Maharaj, Birju's father. So this first school was established. I happened to be one of the first 4 girls who were learning dance from respectable families. But it is not to be mentioned anywhere that you were...
I know in some interview you said that I kept my academic learnings in college separate from my dance training.
Absolutely. No. I meet my college friends even now who tell me, hey, Kapila, I'm सुना तुम कॉलेज के ज़माने में नाचती थी तू.
But why would you keep it so quiet?
No, because if you had, there would be a stigma. It is not today's situation where everyone is showing off that you're a dancer.
But if it was a stigma, What made you learn it?
Oh, I suppose I'll tell what made me learn. That's a bad question. You know, in Calcutta, I was a junior swimming champion. And I suppose and I loved swimming, I still do. And Srinagar was all right, but there was no place here to, other than sometimes being taken to the Jamna and swimming there. So my parents thought that she has too much energy, so that better be directed in some form or the other.
Okay.
And then there was the people from Almora, they were here, Prabhat Ganguly and this lot. Then Achan Maharaj was brought, and Shivraj Bahadur was a great friend of my father. Whatever happened, I found myself learning dance, and I thoroughly not only enjoyed it, I'm totally involved in it.
And then you learned several forms. That came later, but you just blossomed into a very serious student of dance rather than, you know, just keeping it as something that your parents wanted you to do.
No, I don't know about blossoming or not, but I do know that the training with Achan Maharaj in that institution, and if you please, I was the vice principal of the institution at the ripe age of 17 and ran the institution.
So you started young, very
found
young.
Monies for it. And parallel was the establishment of the Gandharv Mahavidyalaya, for which my mother was responsible. And Bhaiji had come from Pune, and his elder brother said, "मैं इसका क्या करूँ, ये तो पूना से आ गया और पक्का गाना गाता है, तो यहाँ क्या करेंगे?" तो फिर माँ ने कहा, I hope Hindi is permissible, माँ ने कहा कि एक स्कूल खोल देते हैं। नहीं, यहाँ पर दिल्ली शहर में और सभ्य समाज के लिए संगीत का विद्यालय, तो स्टूडेंट्स कहाँ से आएंगे? So if you please, mother pulled out Subhash Chandra Malik, who is today Dr. Subhash Malik, and me, कि ये दो students ले लो. The first, and it was in a flat behind cottage.
Charity begins at home.
So this became in your genes, I mean, and the house was full of this kind of a thing, and then there were poets, and there was Bachchan and Harivansh Rai Bachchan, incidentally.
Okay.
People know him only as Amitabh Bachchan, his father. And Sumitra Nandan Pant and Dinkar and the whole lot. So they were in and out, and Maithili Sharan Gupt. So you were then brought up in a atmosphere where the arts, and this became also an assertion of a national identity, because you continue to study English literature and Shakespeare and the whole lot, and Old English and Middle English and so on. And this was another part, and as far as exposure was concerned, which was very good, I think, because it kept you out of being in the profession. And my father made me write in my blood that I shall never earn 1 penny from this art. इस हुनर से मैं 1 पैसा नहीं कमाऊंगी.
Okay.
Now that is a value.
Yes.
Do you understand?
Yes.
And that's where the entire problem has begun in this country. Equation with exposure, equation with money. So sorry.
But Kapila ji, my question here would be, if you want to really excel in a form of art, you need to devote much of your time to that. You can't really be doing one thing here, then another thing there. So to be able to devote a full-time attention to some art form, you need to have financial backing for it. So how do you sort of juxtapose the two?
Priya, we are now in a different kind of a situation, right? those days were very different days. And I would even date this, that is, not just pre-independence and post-independence. I would date this until the early 50s.
Right. Yeah.
And or even the middle 50s, because then the professional artists, and we have to now separate. I was no Bala Saraswati or even her sandal in art. But Bala was supported. I mean, I brought Bala here first time, and I sold tickets in Connaught Place of I think 2 rupees, and they said it was too much. And then we had an invited audience, and they didn't like it at all.
Okay.
They said कि मोटी सी एक औरत आ गई थी और ऐसे ऐसे करके ताल दे के पता नहीं क्या. And I won't name the big shots who
said this. Okay.
Said all this. So unless Bala was supported, you know, her personal history.
Yes.
The exposure was once or twice a year. She went to Banaras, yes, that was one event of a great magnitude, but there is a whole history behind that. She was not even given exposure in Music Academy very easily. And it took a long time for the Music Academy, because that was the absolutely Brahminical thing.
Yes.
Then there was a tension between what was happening with Bala and what Rukmini Devi was trying to assert it a different way. So this is a very complex kind of a thing and no easy answers. What you are saying is absolutely right as of today, or I would say until 20 years or 25 years. Because then people who were going into this profession, take the case of Gangubai Hangal and see what kind of a financial support that she had, or from whom she had that financial. Take the case of Hirabai Barodkar. Take the case of Saraswati Rani.
Exactly.
Take the case of Motabai. All these great women singers of our times, they had patrons.
Yes.
They had either single patrons, but it was not institutionalized.
Yes, it was not.
They were institutions, that is a different matter.
Yes.
And they are today also institutions. Even look at MS.
Yes, absolutely.
Look at her life. And if ultimately she had not married Sadashiv, her trajectory would have been a different.
Very different, exactly.
Isn't it right?
Yes, absolutely.
So one cannot make an assessment like this in terms of the time frame.
जब हमारे नंदा दीदी ने डांस शुरू किया, पिताजी ने उनको शुरू, क्योंकि वो सबसे बड़ी थी, अलग नंदा दीदी।
जी हाँ, मैंने देखा।
नंदा दीदी को देखा आपने, तारा दीदी गोपी कृष्ण की माँ।
तारा को देखा।
कहे कि क्या तुम ये क्या है, मुजरा करने के लिए तुम ये कर रहे हो, सब मोहल्ले वालों ने, बड़े-बड़े जो।
हाँ, क्योंकि तब तो जो बिल्कुल अचंभे की बात है, जो लोग आज नहीं समझ रहे हैं, कि जब आपने कथक की शिक्षा पाई, तब जैसे कि आप कह रही हैं, तब बेटियों को या लड़कियों को तो नहीं सिखाया जाता था।
The time frame today that people from middle class or even rich families are coming and going to a ustad or going to a guru means a certain amount of financial this thing. So either you have it from your own house or you have an institution which is backing you.
Exactly.
Which is the case of the Calcutta Society,
Sangeet Research Academy.
Sangeet Research Academy in Calcutta. And now there are others in Bombay and Sursingar and so on. Now these are different cases. I was merely narrating to you the kind of beginnings of institutionalization.
Yes.
And since you had asked me a personal question, I said it so happens that one has been associated with the establishment of these institutions from the very beginning. And this was the situation in pre-1947.
Yes.
Right? And that is in our language today. Well, if you want to know, I've collected 8 Anna bits from Connaught Place for running these institutions, and monks had given me 2 pouches, one in green chenille and the other in red, one for Gandharva Vidyalaya and one for Sangeet Bharati.
Okay.
Right?
So post independence, what was the situation?
Post-independence, very good. Now, post-independence, the state comes into,
Yes.
the state enters, and very well-meaning.
Yes.
And we all thought, and that is how people like me were persuaded to leave the academia and join the government, because I didn't want to be a babu of any kind. I didn't want to be with IAS. I didn't want to, and so on. Never wanted to give examination, although you topped and broke records in the
Okay.
university.
Can I ask you a question here as to why you chose not to join the civil service?
Because I thought that was this was somehow in one's mind, that one was very interested in teaching and research,
Yeah.
and 2, it seemed that this was still a continuation of an earlier era of administration and so on.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
So many of my, classmates, I can name them, they sat for these examinations and they used to say, "Ki Kapila, tum kyun nahi kar rahi hai?" Also, you got a scholarship to go abroad. I went.
Yeah.
I'd hardly finished my MA.
Yeah. I know you
Before
went
I
to Michigan.
proceeded to Michigan, I got a very fine fellowship.
Right.
So there was no calling to become an.
Yeah.
There was also no calling to enter government service, let me tell you. Not at all. It was because of Maulana Azad and Sir John Sargent that there was no ministry of, there was a nucleus of a ministry of education with Sir John Sargent, and he brought in 4 or 5 people, the likes of Prem Kripal and L.R. Sethi, and then Sayedin joined. And we were all people who had been in the academia and were drawn from, but academia is a big word today, from colleges and
Yes.
universities, to become the first, what was known as the advisory service in the government of India. And for this, the credit is totally of Maulana Azad.
So you joined the government at and during what time? I mean, this was
Late 50s.
Yeah. Okay. And so that by then the Sangeet Natak Academy, all the academies had been formed pretty much, right? The SMA happened in 1952.
Yes. The resolutions had been placed in Parliament.
Right.
And one knows the history of this stuff. And these were 3 people who were responsible. Radhakrishnan,
Yes.
Sri Jawaharlal Nehru, and Maulana Azad.
Absolutely.
These were the 3 people, all 3 in their own spheres. And both, as you know, Dr. Radhakrishnan and Maulana, they stressed the absolutely the literature part of it. And they were not very anxious to have autonomous organization and so on. We'll come to that in
Yes.
a minute, where the locks are. And Maulana Sahab also Sangeet Natak
Yes.
Academy. And there used to be, there still is, the All India Fine Arts and Crafts, and there was the Barda School of Ukil School, Barda School, Ukil School of Art in Janpat, near Sindhya House se aage. So the Lalit Kala Academy, the 3 academies.
Yes.
And also what happened with advocacy of people like Mulk Rajanand and so on. So this had already happened. Then they thought कि जी कोई कल्चर वाला और कोई जो एकेडमिया और कल्चर वाला
चाहिए, हाँ.
चाहिए. And because at that time there wasn't all this about selections and so on, we were kind of invited, कि Kapila Maulana Sahab thinks that you should join.
It was so simple then.
So simple.
Now if you try something like that, there'll be so many issues, so many questions.
Now it is impossible because the state has gone to another
Level,
thing.
yes.
And so no one believes when I say that we were just a bunch of 8 or 10 people who were just invited कि आप Ministry of Education join कर लो और ठीक है UPSC में चले जाना, फिर उसके UPSC में भी चले गए, वहाँ भी first आ गए वापस. And it is the gradual bureaucratization, and you learnt what happened and what was the relationship. I mean, we were all very innocent, let me tell you, all very blue-eyed, idealistic. कि जी ये तो सरकार में तो अब हमारी सरकार हो गई है तो सरकार को ये करना चाहिए. We didn't realize कि सरकार जब करती है तो civil society shrink हो जाती है. We didn't realize कि the relationship, क्योंकि rules तो सारे पुराने rules थे. ये बड़ी देर लगी, 25 साल लगे सरकार में रहने के बाद, या 15 साल रहने के बाद समझ में आया कि जी ये सब आइडियलिज्म तो ठीक है, लेकिन जो सारा स्ट्रक्चर है वो स्ट्रक्चर तो we are still, as you know very well, we are ruled by a highly anarchistical, I'm saying this publicly, and I'll be held accountable for making this statement, but I don't mind making this. We're still ruled by the Registration of Societies Act, which is what? Date? Batao?
Pre-independence.
1864, if you please. So, the rules that by which we are running the country, I've just been looking at in another context on the language issue. Okay. This all goes back to pre-independent colonial India.
Yeah.
It is also the present thing. We didn't realize that while this is very good to have the relationship of the accountability of the administration, this relationship between the executive and not so much the judiciary, but the legislature. This relationship we did not understand. I mean, it took us a long time to know that all this had to be seen in terms of both accountability and in terms of financing. And the moment financing came into the subject, then you had a very different type of because now the state was financing.
Yes.
What was known by this term within single quotes, autonomous bodies.
Kapila ji, you had just mentioned that when the state takes over, civil society shrinks. Here, when you talk about civil society shrinking, you're talking about the individuals who set up institutions, they were sort of vanishing, or what was it?
In many cases this happened. In some cases they survived. As the Gandharma Vidyalaya is a great case of survival and of building up.
But why do you say that? What was the relationship? Why was it shrinking when state patronage was increasing? Why?
Because this is a double kind of a knot. Because on the one hand you thought कि the state अब आ गई है तो हमें क्या करना? The other, the state itself said that we are creating national bodies. And the third, in terms of the quote, and much has been written on that, I don't have to say anything, that what was happening of the patronage within the Indian princely states, their financial thing was shrinking.
Shrinking, yes.
You know this in terms of Mayur, you know this in terms of Gwalior, you know this in terms of Rampur, you know this in terms of the even Raigad. So that was shrinking. So altogether, what happened was that people began to feel that since the state has come into the picture, that kind of initiative or hard work to find the finances to run an institution on your own without going to government was not so easy, or let's say, so since the state now had the system of autonomous bodies, and the autonomous bodies became in course of time, not always, and that is a very ticklish question, and for this we need another interview. Because the autonomous bodies themselves became fund-giving bodies.
That's it. That is the thing.
That is where the whole business.
That's where the problem
If
lies.
they had not become fund-giving bodies, you would have had a different type of. And Maulana did not want this at all. Let me tell you, I want this to be put on record. His words were फना मिलेंगे गुफ्तगू होगी उनको जो उनके मर्जी में होगा करने दीजिए हमें तो and Panditji also, and as you know, Mr. Nehru made the statement as the President of the Sahitya Academy, I shall not allow the government of India to interfere in my work as President of the Sahitya Academy. All right? Now those are big, or Radhakrishnan saying something. Those are big people. And who would dare to handle P.V. Rajamannar?
Yes.
Or the Maharaja of Mysore, Badiyar. Those are very different, and the relationship was a different. But gradually, when these bodies themselves became the institutions of patronage and then of fund giving, and then one has to go into the special history of each of the academies, and this is not the occasion to go into that.
But one thing I'd like to touch upon, the fact that these bodies started out as autonomous bodies. When did this transition happen of becoming fund-giving bodies?
Good question. Priya, that is a very good question. It isn't that when they became. One has then to trace, and I can be wrong, because I'm speaking totally from memory and also from participation.
Yes.
As both sitting in government and also wearing a second hat of an earlier history of autonomy, etc. You see, the government of India created these bodies. I spoke about the constitutions in different ways governed by the 1864 Act registry. However, these are bodies which were started by the central government. So the central government was obliged to have representation from states.
Right.
And if you look at the constitution of these bodies, notwithstanding my unnecessary, uncomplimentary remarks on the 1864 Registration of Societies Act, it meant participation in decision-making of the states. Moment the states come into this, then they want to know what is the proportion that we get out of this cake from the central government.
Yes, yes.
That proportion is not only in terms of recognition, but also in terms of monies.
Right.
All right. Those monies cannot be given through the states, because that's another financial thing, that the autonomous body cannot give money to the government of Andhra Pradesh to finance. So then you go into another lock that you can give monies only to a registered society in Andhra Pradesh.
Okay. Okay.
So here you have a group of people who are representing these states,
Right.
who are also spokespersons for the institutions within their own region.
Yes.
Then you got to a stage, and these are two complicated administrative details with which I won't bother you. Then you could give monies only to a registered body in the state in terms of either proportions. Right?
Okay, okay.
So you landed up being a fund giving, and especially in the field of music and dance. Sahitya, it is very different because it was regional languages and not so much. And there also you needed an institution, but it was a very different ball game. The Lalit Kala Academy worked. Then, all right, we'll go further. This is a very interesting question you asked. The central government or the national government sets up a national body or the three bodies. The constitution has that there has to be representation of the states. There has also to be representation of 5 eminent people in each of the categories,
Yes.
etc. But then there are autonomous bodies. It isn't that the government of India or the hypothetically, absolutely hypothetically speaking, that the Sangeet Natak Academy could give grants to the Music Academy to give grants to other institutions, because then they are autonomous, registered by the same act,
Yes, yes.
and they have to come to the Sangeet Natak, just as an example, I'm not taking other academy, so that one autonomous body registered comes for certain amount of funding. If you have funding, then you need committees. If you have committees, this is, I wish someone would do a visual on this. It would make a fantastic visual. वो जो आपके कार्टून्स होते हैं ना, वो करना चाहिए. यहाँ से गया, फिर वो उसमें से वो खरगोश निकला, खरगोश में से कुछ और निकला, उसमें से कुछ और.
Chain reaction.
Chain reaction. One binding became another binding. So that resultantly you had a network of bondages in the name of creativity. Sorry for my... Because they were all ruled by that, and then the excellence was coming to only awards.
Exactly.
And fellowships. That also has got a little murky. We won't comment on that. Sometimes murky, sometimes not so murky.
I suppose it's got to do with the selection process and the
Yes.
people on the
Right.
panel of these selection committees.
Absolutely. Because there also you had to have a representation. This time this representation was on the basis of, which again you know very well, in terms of कि ये भरतनाट्यम में एक जरूर देना चाहिए, एक कथक में देना चाहिए, एक मणिपुरी में देना चाहिए, एक ओडिसी में देना चाहिए, अब क्लासिकल हो गया तो ओडिसी में भी देना चाहिए, एक क्लासिकल हो गया तो अब सत्रिया में भी देना चाहिए, अब वो क्लासिकल हो गया तो सराय कला वालों का प्रेशर है. Then you run into another problem. Ki what is, and now I speak as an author, what is, and having written these books for which I should blame myself and question myself, classical Indian dance in literature and the dance. Kapila ji, what is classical? You've written another huge big book called Folk Dances of India. Now these categories at this point have to be questioned. So within that, I mean, especially in this field of the Sangeet Natak Academy, it becomes, in a way, a very easy, in a way, the most difficult.
Right.
Because the classificatory system, and again to go back to not your Hindustani music excellence and your being a shayad in a certain framework, but in Odissi, the Goti Puas are not classical.
Exactly, yeah.
Odissi is classical. Will you please tell me? And there'd be no Odissi if there weren't Gotipuas.
And Odissi became a classical form also much after Bharatnatyam.
Absolutely. तो अभी तो ठीक है ना?
Thanks to Charles Fabry and
yes, that's all right. Charles पहली बार इंद्रानी को
Indrani Raman.
So these are in modern history happenings that have taken place which have recognized this. Now let's take a very important, I'm not sure, I'm subject to correction on this. Kathakali is certainly a classical form.
Yes.
But did we recognize Kudiyattam as a classical form? For purposes, yes, they have been given recognition. But we have to ask some of these.
What is the criteria for being considered classical?
I mean, it is a definitional problem.
Yes, yes.
It's a definitional, and I think that these categories should not only be interrogated at this time, but I think that perhaps we should think in terms of excellence. Full stop. Let's take the case of someone whom you will say, Kapilaji, how dare you mention his name in this context? Kumar Gandharv. Will I say he was classical?
What would you call him?
Exactly.
But
Right?
most people call him a musician's musician.
That's right. He is a musician's musician. All right? But the fact that in our, let's say, sociological terms, he was very much not only dependent but was getting his inspiration from all that we would consider as folk.
Folk. Absolutely.
Am I right? So he turns that over and gives it a chiseled formality, a format in a musical system which does not fall into what one would say a sampradaya or a gharana system. But he creates his own gharana.
Yes.
And today there are disciples who are Kumar Gandharv Gharana,
Yes.
but we don't call him a
But
Gharana.
Kapila ji, same is the case with Amir Khan Sahab also.
Amir Khan, bilkul, Amir Khan is a very good case.
And in fact, gharanas, they say, originate either from lineage or from a wild card entry who just creates his own stamp.
Absolutely. Amir Khan is a very good example.
So, but coming back to the last 20 years, what would you say has changed or is very, very typical of the last 20 years that you've noticed in the field of culture?
I'm an old woman.
Oh, but very sprightly.
Whether sprightly or not. There comes a time when you want to get off the stage or the screen.
So, which is why you're in this great position to be able to comment just the way you want to.
I don't know, I don't want to make any evaluative statements. And one can also not generalize on the arts, qua arts, because the situation in the field of literature is a very different, where the two things that have happened in the last 20 years is the emergence of a genre which we have accepted within literature or creativity as Dalit literature. Dalit is a sociological category. It's not a literary category. And but there is a mass of writing which emerges from what one would call both the sociological category called the Dalits, but also a sensibility which is a Dalit sensibility. So we have to make these distinctions which have not been made so much in literary criticism, let me tell you. And we've just talked generally Dalit समाज और दलित साहित्य, तो भाई समाज और साहित्य में अंतर है ना.
बिल्कुल.
वो एक ही हो सकता है, वो दो हो सकता है। मैं दलित हो सकती हूँ, लेकिन मैं तो महाराजा की लड़की भी हो सकती हूँ, जो कि हुआ है, जिसके कि बहुत से केसेस हैं। अच्छा, ये हम कैटेगरी, ये ठीक है कि कबीर के बारे में आजकल बहुत कुछ कहा जा रहा है, लेकिन ही नेवर असर्टेड हिमसेल्फ एज अ दलित। ठीक है, जुलाया था, बड़े ठाट से जुलाया था। कभी उसने ये नहीं कहा था कि इसलिए वो जब अपनी बात कहता है या कहता है कि और ईश्वर की बात, और तो तब वो नहीं है कहता है कि मैं आई एम ए पुअर लिटिल दलित एंड आई वांट माय राइट्स। ही इज टॉकिंग ऑफ राइट्स अप देयर।
Yes. Yes.
To which, if I am a prince or not a prince, I shall certainly say that this man is speaking right. Or, I mean, in another way, in terms of minority issues, Amir Khusro was a minority. Please. ये सब है ना, तो इसमें साहित्य में तो इस तरह की कैटेगरीज कुछ आ गई हैं। जहाँ तक और उसका प्रचार हुआ, या एंड द क्वेश्चन ऑफ गिविंग अवार्ड्स इज अनदर tricky question that you haven't asked me.
Kapila ji, what do you have to say about this great emphasis on awards and the award giving ceremonies and the work that goes into preparing people for awards?
Priya, you've asked me a very important question, to which I don't have clear answers, but I do have a very definite viewpoint. And there's a difference between them.
Yes, but we'd love to know your viewpoint.
And because, as you see, we will go back, Priyaji, to where we began, that the state did not come into the arts pre-independence. And post-independence, the state came into.
Yes.
And the state in turn had the autonomous bodies that came into being, and not necessarily this is part of their mandate, but was to identify excellence. That in operational terms became as an award-giving function of each of the academies, and only day before yesterday you must have read in the papers, the Sahitya Academy has recognized or given awards in different languages. Now, this was the same case. Lalit Kala's case is a slightly different case, and we will not bring that up here. In the case of the Sangeet Natak Academy, they then began by A, identifying a form, and B, identifying excellence within that form. Now, while this could, and that excellence had two ways. One, what is known as election of a fellow. And that was not to be equated with an award in a specific, it was on your overall. That system, I'm afraid, I have to say that even publicly, has been more or less vitiated, if not diluted, even of the fellows, because the distinction between purely performing artists and those who have contributed to the field of, and I want to give the name I know, but all went into recognizing someone as eminent as Professor Saxena in the field of music to make him a fellow, etc. Or Premlata Bhanji. But when it comes to the awards, and I am restricting myself to Sangeet Natak Academy, there is a certain tension also in the Sahitya Academy, but not as aggressive or as bitter. In the case of the Sangeet Natak Academy, it has become an extremely, almost bitter.
But why has it come to this state?
two things. This is both because the art has spread out so much. Two, the fields of music and dance, and particularly the latter, have an inbuilt temptation within themselves of projection, which is not so much even in the case of music.
And theatre?
थिएटर में भी कम है, डांस में सबसे ज़्यादा। डांस में तो भाई मैं डांसर हूँ, मैं स्टेज पर आई हूँ, मुझे तो अवार्ड मिलना चाहिए ना। मैंने 4 साल सीखा हो या नहीं सीखा हो उसकी क्या बात।
So would you say that this problem has got aggravated because of the
exposure,
because of the push that the dancers are giving for getting awards?
Absolutely.
But that's one side of the story. What about the other side, the award giving bodies and the people who are deciding?
Look, sometimes even those lines are blurred, right? I'm a dancer. This is hypothetical. This is not an evaluative statement. It is a pragmatic, down-to-earth statement. I'm a dancer, and I've done very well, and whether I deserve it or don't deserve it so much, the critics have told me how wonderfully I covered the stage, और मेरा ताल भी ठीक ही था. Please, mustn't go on record. I'll be put in jail.
No, this is, you're not speaking about any particular person.
No. तो मुझे अवार्ड भी मिलना चाहिए मुझे. अच्छा, but then there are these committees.
Yes.
So I'm such a distinguished person, so I have to be on the committee.
So I will get an award, and I will also be on the committee that gives the award.
Gives the award. So if I make, and fools like me say that anyone who is in a committee will not either aspire or ever get an award.
Yes.
तो बड़ा मुश्किल हो गया.
But more than that, Kapila ji, this should apply to people who are occupying chairs of executive positions in these bodies. Many of them end up dancing or singing because they themselves are performers.
That's what I'm saying.
So it applies to that also.
No. They become on the executive committee because they are dancers.
No, for instance, if you are Secretary Sangeet Natak Academy or you are Chairperson Sangeet Natak Academy and you are a performer yourself, willy-nilly, the lines are blurred.
Well, I think that those lines are blurred, and I would say, and I'm quite clear in my mind, that if you have decided to take up a office in a particular organization, and you are also in a decision making, then you have to make the difficult choice.
Yes, but that choice people don't have to make still, because there are people who are holding such office and who are dancing and singing.
Let me say, I would modify your sentence, don't make. I would say that they don't.
You made it easier for me.
Right? Because otherwise it should have occurred to me that propriety demands that for this time and duration I shall not be a public performer.
Exactly.
This has happened especially in the case of a former secretary of the Sangeet Natak Academy, and you know that case. And I will not perform, especially on 2 conditions. Yes, I continue to dance, I continue to be in the discourse on dance. I am a dancer, but I'm holding a position there. But especially the head of the executive, because the chairman's and vice chairman's position, I mean, Wadyar was a great musician. He kept singing for all his worth, but he was in my soul. But he wasn't asking for either an award.
Yes, yes.
Right? Or Rajmannar, who was a great connoisseur. Or Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay, who may not be known so much as a musician, but she did dance in her days. And so for that duration, I'm afraid, and this should be my position only also in respect of some of these eminent artists have had executive positions in the government of India.
Exactly.
And I'm afraid this is not all.
But
या
coming
तो
back
आप
to-
नाची लो
हाँ.
या आप फाइल ही कर लो।
Exactly.
दोनों चीजें नहीं हो सकती।
But ये तो हो ही रहा है.
आप अलग से रियाज करते रहो, वो अलग बात है,
तो-
वो सुबह शाम आपका मतलब है।
So there should be a rule there, no? But there are no such rules. So people have these loopholes. I mean, this is not a loophole. It's just there. You can do it.
Priya ji, you are right, but you and I might be exceptional voices.